London, 1812. Miss Winifred Barton stood in her customary position at the edge of the Almack's ballroom, her carefully arranged features betraying nothing of the resignation that had long settled in her heart. 6 seasons she had endured, 6 years of polite applause for her accomplished pianoforte playing, 6 years of the occasional obligatory dance with elderly gentlemen who had promised her father a turn about the floor with his daughter. 6 years of watching younger ladies make their debuts and secure advantageous matches while she remained, like a permanent fixture of the wallpaper, ever present but seldom noticed. "Another glass of lemonade, Miss Barton?" The patronizing smile of Lady Jersey accompanied the offer. "Thank you, but I am quite content," Winifred replied, her practiced smile never wavering. In truth, she had consumed enough tepid lemonade over the years to fill the Thames twice over. At 26, Winifred had accepted her fate with the pragmatism that had become her defining characteristic. Marriage was a business arrangement, nothing more, a truth she had witnessed in her parents' cold coexistence and in countless unions among the ton. Having neither exceptional beauty nor substantial dowry, she had recognized early that her prospects were limited. The initial disappointment had calcified into a protective shell of indifference. "One must marry well or not at all," she murmured to herself, watching as debutantes fluttered their fans at potential suitors. "And as I cannot marry well, I shall content myself with not at all." Her younger sister had already secured a viscount. Her cousins were all respectably wed, even her childhood friend, Emily Harrington, once considered the plainest girl in Derbyshire, had married a baronet last spring. Yet here stood Winifred, repeating her well-rehearsed observations about the weather and inquiring after the health of elderly relatives with mechanical precision. "Miss Barton, you appear deep in thought." The voice startled her from her reverie. She turned to find Lady Dalrymple, one of Almack's formidable patronesses, regarding her with curious eyes. "Merely observing the new fashions, my lady," Winifred replied smoothly. "Miss Henderson's gown is particularly fine." "Indeed." Lady Dalrymple followed her gaze to where a young lady in pale blue silk was being introduced to a circle of gentlemen. Though one wonders if the modiste was overly generous with the décolletage. "But I wish to speak with you on another matter. You are acquainted with the Dowager Duchess of Lockhart, are you not?" Winifred nodded. "My mother corresponds with her Grace occasionally. They were schoolgirls together at Miss Pinkerton's academy." "Excellent. Her Grace's grandson, the Duke, has recently returned from the continent and requires assistance with organizing his late father's papers. I understand you have a scholarly disposition and excellent organizational skills." Winifred blinked, uncertain if she had heard correctly. "I do enjoy intellectual pursuits, my lady, but—" "Perfect." The Dowager specifically requested someone of mature years and sensible character. A flighty debutante would never do. The Duke will call upon you tomorrow to discuss the arrangement. "I've already spoken with your mother." Before Winifred could form a coherent response, Lady Dalrymple had swept away, leaving her in a state of bewildered confusion. Employment, for that was surely what was being proposed, was not something ladies of her station undertook. Yet the prospect of escape from the endless parade of balls where she stood sentinel by the lemonade table held undeniable appeal. "Who was that speaking with you?" her mother demanded, appearing at her side. Mrs. Barton's ever-vigilant gaze had caught the unusual interaction. "Lady Dalrymple. She mentioned something about the Duke of Lockhart requiring assistance with his father's papers." Her mother's eyes widened. "The Duke of Lockhart, Lucian Darlington, why, he's the most sought-after bachelor in England since his return, inherited one of the largest fortunes in the country. Every matchmaking mamma has him in her sights." "I believe I am being offered employment, mother, not a marriage proposal," Winifred replied dryly. Mrs. Barton pressed her lips together. "Well, it is unusual, but the connection to a ducal household could prove advantageous." The Dowager was always fond of me. Perhaps she remembers how I helped her with that unfortunate incident involving the French dancing master. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of speculation. For the first time in years, Winifred found herself the object of curious glances and whispered conversations. The novelty was not entirely comfortable. The following afternoon, Winifred was summoned to the drawing-room where the Duke of Lockhart awaited. She had dressed with unusual care in her best morning gown of sage green muslin, though she scolded herself for such vanity. This was a business matter, nothing more. The man who rose at her entrance was not at all what she had expected. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly at his temples, the Duke possessed the kind of striking features that caused ladies to drop their handkerchiefs in strategic locations. His eyes, an unusual shade of grey-blue, assessed her with unexpected intensity. "Miss Barton." His bow was perfectly correct. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me." "Your Grace," she curtsied, noting with surprise that he appeared younger than she had anticipated, perhaps 30 or 31. "I understand you require assistance with some papers." "Indeed," he gestured for her to be seated. "My father was something of an amateur historian. He left behind a substantial collection of correspondence, journals, and historical documents that require cataloguing and organization. My grandmother suggested that you might be interested in undertaking such a project." Winifred considered his words carefully. "I must confess, Your Grace, I am somewhat confused by the proposal. Surely you have secretaries or librarians better suited to such a task." A fleeting smile crossed his features. "You are direct, Miss Barton. I appreciate that. The truth is that these papers contain personal family history as well as politically sensitive material. I require someone discreet, intelligent, and forgive my bluntness, someone unlikely to be seeking a husband in my household." She felt her cheeks warm with a mixture of embarrassment and indignation. "I see. And as an aging spinster, I present no threat of matrimonial designs." "That is not at all what I meant," he replied quickly, looking genuinely discomforted. "Rather, my grandmother spoke highly of your intellect and character. She described you as a woman of substance rather than superficial accomplishments." Before Winifred could respond, her mother burst into the room with a tea tray, something she had never done before in her life. The housemaid trailing behind her looked equally astonished by this breach in protocol. "Your Grace, how delightful to welcome you to our home. I've brought some refreshment." "Winnie, do pour for his Grace." The Duke accepted the interruption with grace, but Winifred noted the slight tightening of his jaw. When her mother finally departed after extracting a promise from the Duke to attend their small dinner party the following week, he turned back to Winifred with an apologetic expression. "I fear I've made a poor beginning, Miss Barton. Allow me to be clear. The position would involve working 3 days a week at Lockhart House. You would be provided with transportation, compensated generously, and treated with the utmost respect. My grandmother would often be present, and your reputation would remain unblemished." Winifred considered the offer. Employment was unusual for a woman of her station, but not entirely unprecedented. More importantly, it offered escape from the endless monotony of her current existence. "I should like to accept on a trial basis, Your Grace. Perhaps a month to determine if the arrangement suits us both." "Excellent." For the first time, he smiled fully, transforming his austere features into something altogether more dangerous to female composure. "Shall we begin this Thursday?" And so began Winifred Barton's unexpected association with the Duke of Lockhart. 3 days each week, she arrived at his Mayfair residence and worked diligently in the library, sorting through decades of correspondence, journals, and historical documents. The Duke's father had maintained connections with significant political and literary figures, and his collection was a fascinating glimpse into recent history. The Duke himself was often present, working at a desk across the room on estate matters. Their interactions were initially formal and limited to discussions of the papers, but gradually a cautious rapport developed. "Miss Barton, have you come across the letters from Lord Byron yet?" he asked one afternoon, looking up from his account books. "Indeed, Your Grace. Your father appears to have been something of a literary patron. And what do you make of Byron's poetry?" Winifred hesitated. "I find his work passionate, but somewhat excessive in sentiment." The Duke laughed, a rich sound she had rarely heard from him. "How diplomatically phrased. You prefer more restrained expression, I take it." "I simply believe that true depth of feeling doesn't always require dramatic declarations. Sometimes the most profound emotions are conveyed through simple honesty." He regarded her thoughtfully. "A refreshing perspective. Most young ladies I encounter seem to prefer Gothic excesses and swoon at the mention of Byron's name." "I am hardly a young lady, Your Grace," she replied wryly. "At 26, I've outlived my romantic fancies." Something flickered in his expression. "Age brings wisdom, not the death of feeling, Miss Barton. At least it shouldn't." The conversation lingered in Winifred's thoughts long after she returned home. The Duke was unlike any man of her acquaintance, intelligent, observant, and surprisingly willing to engage with her opinions. Yet she reminded herself sternly that he was her employer, nothing more, and that such distinctions of rank were insurmountable. Weeks passed, and Winifred found herself anticipating her days at Lockhart House with unprecedented eagerness. The work itself was fascinating, but increasingly it was the conversations with the Duke that she treasured, discussions about literature, history, and politics that left her mind stimulated in ways the vapid exchanges of the ballroom never had. Her mother, meanwhile, had developed grand ambitions based on this connection. The small dinner party had been followed by invitations to musical evenings and afternoon teas, all of which the Duke politely attended, much to the astonishment of London society. "He is definitely showing a marked interest in our family," Mrs. Barton declared one morning. "Mrs. Hightower was positively green with envy when he conversed with you for a full quarter hour at Lady Medford's soirée." "He was merely being polite, Mother," Winifred replied, sorting through her correspondence. "The Duke values my work on his father's papers, nothing more." "Nonsense. A duke doesn't spend time with a family like ours out of politeness alone. Why, he's declined invitations from countesses and marchionesses to attend our gatherings." Winifred sighed. "Please don't construct fantasies. The disappointment will be too great when they inevitably collapse." Yet even as she cautioned her mother against unrealistic hopes, Winifred found herself experiencing unwelcome flutters when the Duke entered a room, or when his hand accidentally brushed hers as they examined documents together. Such reactions were foolish in the extreme, she knew. Men like the Duke of Lockhart married dewy-eyed debutantes with substantial dowries and aristocratic connections, not plain, outspoken spinsters employed to organize their libraries. The season progressed, and with it came the Longworth Ball, an event known for its lavish decorations and excellent orchestra. Winifred attended with her usual lack of expectations, prepared for another evening of observation from the periphery. "Miss Barton," the Duke's voice came from behind her as she examined a particularly ornate floral arrangement. "You appear to be contemplating botanical abduction." She turned, surprised to find him looking particularly handsome in evening attire. "I was admiring Lady Longworth's excess. These orchids must have cost a small fortune to force out of season. And do you approve of such extravagance?" "I find it rather like Byron's poetry, impressive in technical execution, but somewhat overblown in sentiment." He laughed, drawing curious glances from nearby guests. "Your honesty is a constant delight, Miss Barton. Would you do me the honor of dancing the next set?" Winifred stared at him. In 6 seasons, she had never been asked to dance by a gentleman under 70. "Aye. That is very kind, but unnecessary, Your Grace. I'm quite content observing." I'm not offering out of kindness, he replied, his expression unexpectedly serious. I'm asking because I would enjoy dancing with you. The waltz that followed was nothing short of transformative. Winifred had learned the steps like any properly educated young lady, but had performed them only in practice with her dancing master. Now, guided by the Duke's confident lead, she found herself gliding across the floor with unexpected grace. "You dance beautifully," he murmured, his hand warm at her waist. "You sound surprised, Your Grace." "Not surprised. Delighted." His eyes held hers with an intensity that made her heart race. "Though I confess to being surprised by how perfectly you fit in my arms." The impropriety of such a statement should have shocked her, yet Winifred found herself unable to summon appropriate indignation. Instead, a warm glow spread through her chest, dangerous in its pleasantness. When the music ended, Winifred became aware of the numerous eyes fixed upon them. The Duke of Lockhart dancing with Miss Barton, the confirmed spinster who had decorated the walls of Almack's for 6 seasons, was apparently a spectacle worthy of considerable attention. "Everyone is staring," she whispered as he escorted her back to her mother. "Let them," he replied calmly. "Perhaps they're finally noticing what I've had the good fortune to discover." Before she could ask what he meant by such a cryptic statement, they reached Mrs. Barton, whose expression of triumphant delight was mortifying in its transparency. In the days that followed, Winifred found herself the subject of unprecedented interest. Ladies who had previously acknowledged her with the barest civility now sought her company. Gentlemen who had never glanced in her direction suddenly discovered her existence. Most disconcerting of all, 3 men, a widowed baron, a wealthy merchant, and a retired colonel, had called upon her father to request permission to pay their addresses. "It's most extraordinary," her mother exclaimed. 3 offers in a fortnight, when you hadn't received a single one in 6 seasons, and all because the Duke danced with you. His approval has made you quite the fashion. How flattering to know my value is determined entirely by ducal endorsement, Winifred replied tartly. "I believe I shall decline all 3. Her mother's face fell. "Decline? But Winnie, this may be your only opportunity for marriage." "I have no interest in being chosen, because the Duke of Lockhart momentarily elevated my social standing. Any man who only noticed me after such an endorsement is not a man whose character I can respect." Mrs. Barton pressed her handkerchief to her forehead. "You are impossible. The Duke himself is obviously not going to offer for you, regardless of what your father thinks. A dance is not a declaration of intent." Winifred froze. "What does father think?" "Only that the Duke seems to enjoy your company more than is typical for an employer." "But he is being ridiculous. A duke doesn't marry a girl without fortune or connections." "On that point, we are in perfect agreement," Winifred replied, ignoring the painful twist in her chest at the truth of these words. When Thursday arrived, Winifred approached her work at Lockhart House with determined professionalism. The Duke, however, seemed unusually distracted. "Have I misplaced the Wellington correspondence?" he asked, rifling through papers on his desk. "No, Your Grace. You requested I set it aside for further review. It's in the mahogany cabinet, 3rd drawer." He located the documents and returned to his desk, only to rise again moments later to adjust the curtains, though the light had not changed. "Is something troubling you, Your Grace?" Winifred finally asked, setting aside her cataloguing. He turned to her with an expression she couldn't interpret. "Walk with me in the garden, Miss Barton. I find I cannot concentrate today." The Lockhart House gardens were renowned for their beauty, even in the heart of London. As they strolled along a gravel path bordered by early summer roses, Winifred waited for the Duke to speak. "I understand you've received several offers of marriage," he said at last. Winifred nearly stumbled. "News travels quickly in London. My grandmother maintains an impressive network of informants." His tone was light, but his expression remained serious. May I ask if you've accepted any of these suitors? I have not, she replied carefully. Nor do I intend to. May I inquire why? He stopped walking, turning to face her directly. Winifred considered deflecting with humor, but found herself answering with unexpected honesty. Because they don't know me, Your Grace. They've never made the slightest effort to converse with me in 6 seasons. Their sudden interest stems solely from your public acknowledgement, which is hardly a foundation for respect, let alone matrimony. He nodded slowly. A wise assessment. And what qualities would you seek in a husband were you inclined to accept such an offer? The conversation had taken a decidedly inappropriate turn, yet Winifred found herself continuing. I would wish for a man who values intelligence above beauty, substance above appearance, someone who sees me clearly rather than the reflection of social expectations. She paused, then added softly, but such considerations are academic. I've long accepted that marriage is unlikely for me. Why? The directness of his question startled her. I should think that obvious, Your Grace. I have neither beauty, fortune, nor illustrious connections to recommend me. At 26, I am well past my prime matrimonial years. I've made peace with my future as a spinster aunt to my sister's children. The Duke's expression darkened. Has it never occurred to you that a man might value your exceptional mind, your refreshing honesty, your subtle humor, and your quiet strength far above the transient attributes society prizes? Winifred stared at him, heart pounding. Such a man would be a rare exception indeed. Or perhaps merely a man who has learned through bitter experience to recognize genuine worth. He took a step closer. Miss Barton, Winifred, I find myself in the unexpected position of— Your Grace, the breathless voice of the butler interrupted whatever the Duke had been about to say. Forgive the intrusion, but Lady Harrington has arrived with her daughter and insists upon seeing you immediately. The Duke's jaw tightened. Please inform Lady Harrington that I am engaged at present and will attend her shortly. I have conveyed as much, Your Grace, but she is most insistent. She claims the matter concerns a promise made to her late husband regarding Miss Harrington's coming out. With visible reluctance, the Duke turned back to Winifred. I must address this, but our conversation is far from concluded. Will you wait? She nodded, too confused by the exchange to formulate a coherent response. As he strode back toward the house, Winifred sank onto a stone bench, her thoughts in turmoil. Had the Duke been on the verge of— But no, such a notion was absurd, yet his words had seemed to suggest. Her contemplation was interrupted by the sound of female voices approaching along the garden path. Mamma, this is most irregular. The Duke will think us terribly forward, a young woman was saying. Nonsense, Amelia. Your father was his godfather. The Duke has a moral obligation to launch your season properly. We simply need to remind him of his duty, came the determined reply. Winifred recognized Lady Harrington, a widow whose husband had indeed been a close friend of the previous Duke. The girl beside her was petite and pretty, with golden curls and a complexion like porcelain. Miss Barton, Lady Harrington exclaimed upon seeing her. What a surprise to find you here. Are you collecting botanical specimens? Good afternoon, Lady Harrington, Winifred replied, rising from the bench. I'm employed by the Duke to organize his late father's papers. Employed? Lady Harrington's eyebrows rose dramatically. How unusual. But then you always were an unconventional girl. Amelia, this is Miss Barton. Her sister married Viscount Langley last year. The young lady curtsied politely. A pleasure, Miss Barton. Miss Harrington is making her debut this season, Lady Harrington continued. The Duke has promised to open the first dance with her at her coming-out ball. Such a connection will ensure she makes an advantageous match. Winifred felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. How fortunate for Miss Harrington. Indeed. There are even whispers that the Duke himself might consider her. After all, he must marry soon, and Amelia's bloodlines are impeccable. Mamma, please. Miss Harrington looked mortified. There's no need for such modesty, dear. Miss Barton understands the ways of the world. The Duke requires a young bride of suitable rank and beauty. It's simply the natural order of things. The natural order of things. The phrase echoed in Winifred's mind as she excused herself, citing work that required her attention. Of course, Lady Harrington was right. A duke married for dynastic purposes, to secure alliances, produce heirs, and maintain the social hierarchy. Whatever moment of connection she had imagined in the garden had been nothing more than polite conversation misinterpreted by her foolish heart. By the time the Duke returned to the library, Winifred had composed herself. She worked with mechanical efficiency, responding to his attempts at conversation with polite detachment. "You seem disturbed, Miss Barton," he finally said, coming to stand beside her desk. "Has something happened?" "Not at all, Your Grace. I merely remembered a prior commitment and must leave earlier than usual today." He frowned. "This is most unlike you. Have I given offense in some way?" "Certainly not. I simply—" She hesitated, then continued with forced brightness. "I merely wish to congratulate you on your apparent connection to Miss Harrington. She seems a lovely young lady, perfectly suited to the role of Duchess." His expression shifted from concern to confusion. "I beg your pardon. Lady Harrington mentioned your promise to open Miss Harrington's debut ball. A great honor for the young lady, and one that will undoubtedly secure her future prospects." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "I see. And did Lady Harrington suggest other arrangements as well?" Winifred busied herself organizing papers. "She merely observed that a man in your position requires a suitable bride. An incontrovertible fact, of course." "Indeed. And what qualities would constitute suitable in your estimation?" "Youth, beauty, impeccable lineage, substantial dowry," she recited, as if reading from a list. "The standard requirements for a ducal bride." "How fascinating!" His tone had cooled considerably. "And you naturally assume I share this conventional view. I would never presume to know your Grace's mind on such matters. Yet you've clearly drawn conclusions about my intentions toward Miss Harrington based on her mother's statements." Winifred finally looked up at him. "It was merely an observation, Your Grace. Your marital prospects are, of course, entirely your own concern." "How gracious of you to acknowledge that much," he replied with unexpected sharpness. "Since we're exchanging observations, may I offer one? You have constructed an impenetrable fortress of low expectations to protect yourself from disappointment. You dismiss any possibility of happiness because accepting hope requires courage, and it's easier to embrace resignation than risk rejection." Winifred flinched as if struck. "That is most unfair, Your Grace." "Is it? You've decided what I want, what I value, and who I should marry without ever asking me directly. You've determined that your worth can be measured only by society's shallow standards rather than by the substance of your character. That strikes me as profoundly unfair to both of us." The tension between them was palpable. Winifred felt exposed, as though he had peeled back her carefully constructed defenses to reveal the vulnerable heart beneath. "I should go," she said quietly. "I've completed the correspondence through 1802. I'll continue with the political papers next week." As she gathered her belongings, the Duke remained silent, watching her with an intensity that made her hands tremble slightly. Only when she reached the door did he speak again. "I will be attending the Pemberton ball this evening. I hope you will be present as well." "My family has received an invitation," she acknowledged. "Good, because this conversation is far from finished, Miss Barton. And I find I dislike leaving matters unresolved between us." The Pemberton ball was the most anticipated event of the late season. The Marchioness of Pemberton spared no expense, and invitations were coveted by even the highest ranks of society. Under normal circumstances, Winifred would have approached the evening with detached amusement, content to observe the social machinations from her usual position on the periphery. Tonight, however, she dressed with uncharacteristic care, allowing her maid to arrange her dark hair in a more flattering style than her usual severe chignon. Her gown, a new creation in deep sapphire blue that her mother had insisted upon, "Navy is too severe for your complexion, Winnie," was more becoming than her usual modest selections. "You look different," her mother observed as they prepared to depart. "Almost handsome, in fact. The color suits you remarkably well." "Thank you for that qualified compliment, Mother," Winifred replied dryly. Mrs. Barton adjusted her daughter's necklace. "Well, you've never cared much for your appearance before. I'm simply noting the change. The Duke will be present this evening, I understand." "Along with half of London society." "Yes, but half of London society hasn't employed you in their home or danced with you at Longworth's ball." Her mother's shrewd eyes studied her face. "You've developed feelings for him, haven't you?" Winifred turned away, ostensibly to retrieve her fan. "That would be both inappropriate and foolish." "Not an answer, my dear," Mrs. Barton sighed. "I've pushed you toward marriage for years, hoping you'd make a decent match before it was too late. But a duke! Winnie, I only wish to spare you disappointment." "I assure you, Mother, I harbor no illusions about my position in the Duke's life. I am his employee, nothing more." Mrs. Barton appeared unconvinced, but mercifully dropped the subject. The ballroom at Pemberton House was ablaze with hundreds of candles, the light reflecting off jewels and gilt decorations to create an atmosphere of almost magical brilliance. As Winifred entered with her parents, she was conscious of curious glances and whispered conversations. Her dance with the Duke at the Longworth ball had elevated her from invisible wallflower to subject of speculation. "Miss Barton," Lady Dalrymple approached, her assessing gaze taking in Winifred's improved appearance. "You look remarkably well this evening. Blue is decidedly your color." "Thank you, Lady Dalrymple. I understand you've been working with the Duke on his father's papers. A most unusual arrangement, but one that appears to suit you both." Her shrewd eyes missed nothing. "He speaks quite highly of your intelligence." Before Winifred could respond, a stir near the entrance drew their attention. The Duke of Lockhart had arrived, his commanding presence causing a ripple of awareness through the assembly. He exchanged brief greetings with his host and hostess before his gaze swept the room, coming to rest on Winifred with unmistakable purpose. "I believe you're about to be approached," Lady Dalrymple observed with evident satisfaction. "How interesting." Indeed, the Duke was making his way directly toward them, ignoring the fluttering debutantes and ambitious mammas who attempted to intercept him. "Lady Dalrymple, Miss Barton." His bow was impeccable. "You both look lovely this evening." "Your Grace is too kind," Lady Dalrymple replied. "I was just complimenting Miss Barton on her gown. Blue suits her complexion admirably, does it not?" "Indeed." "Though I find Miss Barton would outshine the company in sackcloth." His direct gaze made Winifred's cheeks warm. "Would you honor me with the first dance, Miss Barton?" Lady Dalrymple's eyebrows rose fractionally. 2 invitations to dance at consecutive balls was beyond mere politeness. It was a marked preference that would not go unnoticed. "Thank you, Your Grace," Winifred replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Though I believe Miss Harrington may have expected that honor." A flicker of annoyance crossed his features. "Miss Harrington is engaged to dance with Lord Wexford. My obligations this evening are entirely of my own choosing." As he led her to the floor for the opening quadrille, Winifred was acutely aware of the attention they had drawn. The Duke of Lockhart could have partnered any young lady in the room. His choice of the unremarkable Miss Barton was nothing short of extraordinary. "You're very quiet," he observed as they took their positions. "Still troubled by our conversation this afternoon." "I'm simply conscious of the spectacle we're creating," she replied. Your choice of partner is causing considerable comment. Let them comment. I dance with whom I please. The music began, and he continued during the figures of the dance. I've been thinking about what you said regarding suitable qualities in a ducal bride. Winifred nearly missed a step. Perhaps this isn't the most appropriate venue for such a discussion. On the contrary, it's perfect. No one can overhear us, yet we're surrounded by precisely the society whose expectations you believe I must fulfill. She had no response to that logic. As they separated for the pattern of the dance, she caught sight of Lady Harrington watching them with undisguised displeasure. Youth, beauty, lineage, dowry, the Duke enumerated when they came together again. A rather soulless inventory, wouldn't you agree? Those are society's requirements, not mine, she countered. And yet you assume I share them. His hand briefly clasped hers as the dance demanded. What if I told you I value intelligence over beauty, honesty over social graces, character over connections? I would say your grace is uncommonly enlightened, but perhaps not entirely practical. A duke has responsibilities beyond personal preference. He smiled slightly. Indeed I do. The most important being the welfare of my family line and estates, which requires a partner of intelligence, practicality, and moral fortitude, not merely a decorative ornament for my ballroom. The dance separated them again, giving Winifred a moment to compose herself. His words seemed designed to unsettle her carefully maintained equilibrium. When the quadrille ended, the Duke did not immediately return her to her mother's side. Instead, he guided her toward the terrace doors. Would you care for some air, Miss Barton? The ballroom grows warm. She hesitated, aware that stepping onto the terrace alone with the Duke would invite speculation. Yet the prospect of continuing their conversation in private was too tempting to resist. Briefly, then, she agreed. The terrace was illuminated by strategically placed lanterns, providing light without compromising the beauty of the star-filled sky above. A few other couples strolled at a distance, providing the minimum chaperonage required by propriety. You seem determined to believe the worst of me, the Duke said without preamble. To assume I'm as shallow and conventional as the society you so accurately critique. Winifred sighed. I don't think poorly of you at all, Your Grace, quite the opposite. I merely recognize the realities of our respective positions. And those realities preclude any genuine connection between us, any possibility that I might see in you qualities far more valuable than the superficial attributes society prizes. Her heart pounded painfully. Your Grace, please don't. Lucian, he interrupted. My name is Lucian, and I would very much like to hear you say it at least once before you reject the possibility of anything beyond employer and employee between us. Winifred stared at him, breathless with the implications of his request. This is most irregular. I'm finding that I have little regard for regularity when it stands in the way of what matters. He moved closer, his eyes intent on hers. Say my name, Winifred. Lucian, she whispered, the intimacy of it sending a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the evening air. His smile was transformative, warming his austere features into something dangerously appealing. There, was that so difficult? Exceedingly, she replied with unexpected honesty. Because it suggests a familiarity that cannot exist between us. Cannot or should not, according to arbitrary social dictates. He took her gloved hand in his, a liberty that made her pulse race. What if I told you that from the moment Lady Dalrymple suggested you for the position in my household, I have found myself increasingly drawn to your mind, your character, and yes, your beauty, which you so stubbornly refuse to acknowledge? Winifred withdrew her hand, emotions warring within her. You can't possibly mean that. I assure you, I can and do. My grandmother, surprisingly enough, recognized the possibility before I did. She suggested you not merely for your organizational skills, but because she believed we might suit. She's observed you for years at social functions and developed a high regard for your intelligence and dignity. The Dowager Duchess has been matchmaking. Winifred couldn't quite comprehend the notion. In her subtle way, yes. Though I suspect even she didn't anticipate how quickly and completely I would come to admire you. His expression grew serious. Winifred, I need to know if there is any possibility that you might return my regard, or if your conviction about the impossibility of connection between us is unalterable. The moment stretched between them, fraught with possibility. Winifred felt as though she stood at a crossroads, one path leading back to the safe, predictable existence she had accepted, the other toward an uncertain future that offered both risk and potential joy. She began, only to be interrupted by the sound of approaching voices. Your Grace, there you are. Lady Harrington emerged onto the terrace, her daughter in tow. Amelia has been looking everywhere for you. I believe you promised her a dance. The Duke's expression closed like a shutter. I don't recall making such a promise, Lady Harrington, though I would be happy to stand up with Miss Harrington later in the evening. At present, I'm engaged in a private conversation with Miss Barton. Lady Harrington's smile froze. How thoughtful of you to entertain Miss Barton. Such charity toward a lady of her years must be commended. But surely a brief dance with dear Amelia would not be too much to ask. The poor child has been so looking forward to it. Winifred felt the familiar sting of humiliation. Lady Harrington's thinly veiled condescension was a reminder of her precarious social position, neither young enough to be courted nor established enough to be respected. I should return to my mother, she said quietly. Thank you for the dance, Your Grace. Winifred, wait, he began, but she had already curtsied and turned to leave. There, you see. Miss Barton understands how these things work, Lady Harrington said with satisfaction. Now, about that dance. Winifred did not hear the Duke's response as she made her way back into the ballroom, her composure threatening to crack. She had been a fool to allow even a moment's hope that someone like the Duke of Lockhart might genuinely care for her. Lady Harrington's intervention had been a timely reminder of reality, a reality where aging spinsters did not capture the hearts of the most eligible men in England. She located her mother near the refreshment table and approached with a determined smile. The quadrille was lovely, but I find I have a slight headache. Might we leave soon? Mrs. Barton studied her daughter's face with unusual perception. What happened? Did the Duke say something to upset you? Not at all. I'm simply tired. Winnie, you've never been able to lie convincingly. Your eyes betray everything you feel. Her mother's tone softened. Whatever occurred, running away solves nothing. Before Winifred could respond, a collective gasp from nearby guests drew their attention. The Duke had re-entered the ballroom and was making his way directly toward them, his expression resolute. Lady Harrington and her daughter were nowhere to be seen. Miss Barton, he said when he reached them, bowing to Mrs. Barton. Forgive the interruption, but our conversation was incomplete. Your Grace, I believe Miss Harrington was expecting a dance, Winifred replied, struggling to maintain her composure. Miss Harrington will have to be disappointed. His voice carried just enough to be heard by those nearby. I find I have more pressing matters to address. Mrs. Barton, demonstrating unexpected tact, murmured something about speaking with Lady Pemberton and moved away, though not far enough to compromise propriety. You left before I could respond to Lady Harrington's presumption, the Duke continued. I would have you know that I corrected her misapprehension most definitively. Winifred glanced around, acutely aware of the attention they were attracting. Your Grace, this is hardly the place. On the contrary, it's precisely the place. You believe I'm constrained by social expectations, concerned with appearances and conventional matches. Let me demonstrate how little I care for such things. He took her hand, his touch warm even through her glove. Winifred Barton, in full view of London society, I am asking you to dance with me again, not out of charity or obligation, but because there is no other woman in this room with whom I wish to stand up." The murmurs around them grew as he continued, his voice carrying clearly. "Furthermore, I would be honored if you would allow me to call upon you tomorrow, with the express purpose of speaking with your father regarding matters of significance to us both." Winifred felt the room spin slightly. "Your Grace, Lucian, do you understand what you're saying? What people will assume?" "I'm counting on those assumptions," he replied, his eyes never leaving hers, "because they happen to be correct." The implications of his statement crashed over her like a wave. The Duke of Lockhart was publicly declaring his interest, not just as an employer or acquaintance, but as a suitor. The impossibility of it made her dizzy. "You can't possibly want this," she whispered. "The scandal, the gossip. What I want is you." The simple declaration, spoken with such certainty, silenced her objections. "The question is, what do you want, Winifred? Not what you've resigned yourself to accept, but what you truly desire." In that moment, surrounded by the cream of London society, who watched with undisguised fascination, Winifred Barton faced the choice that would define her life. Safety and certainty on one hand, risk and potential joy on the other. "I want," she began, then found her courage. "I want to dance with you, Lucian. And I want my father to be at home tomorrow when you call." His smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Then I believe we have an understanding, Miss Barton." As he led her onto the floor for a waltz, whispers erupted throughout the ballroom. The Duke of Lockhart was dancing with Miss Barton for the second time in a single evening, and had requested permission to call upon her father tomorrow. It was as good as a declaration of intent. "They'll say you've taken leave of your senses," Winifred murmured as they began to waltz. "They've been saying that since I hired a spinster to organize my library instead of proposing to the latest diamond of the season," he replied, his hand warm at her waist. "I find I care remarkably little for their opinions." "And your grandmother, what will she say about such an unconventional choice?" His laugh surprised her. "She'll say she was right all along. It was her idea to employ you, if you recall. She's been dropping hints about your suitability for weeks." As they circled the floor, Winifred caught sight of Lady Harrington's scandalized expression, her mother's astonished delight, and Lady Dalrymple's knowing smile. The world she had known, one of resigned acceptance and limited expectations, was transforming before her eyes. "I've spent 6 years watching from the sidelines," she said softly. "I never imagined I might be the center of such attention." "You've been the center of my attention from the moment you informed me that Byron was excessively sentimental," he replied. "Your honesty was like a breath of fresh air after years of calculated flattery." When the dance ended, he did not immediately release her hand. "Until tomorrow, then." "Until tomorrow," she agreed, a smile she couldn't suppress brightening her features. The following day passed in a blur of anticipation and disbelief. By afternoon, Winifred found herself seated in the drawing-room as the Duke of Lockhart formally requested her father's permission to pay his addresses. "I hold your daughter in the highest esteem, sir," he stated with simple dignity. "Her intelligence, character, and principles have impressed me deeply. I believe we would suit exceptionally well, and I would consider it the greatest honor if she would consent to become my wife." Mr. Barton, normally a practical man not given to displays of emotion, appeared momentarily speechless. "Your Grace, while I am naturally gratified by your interest, I must ask, are you certain? Winifred is a wonderful girl, of course, but she brings neither fortune nor connections to such a match." "She brings herself, which is all I desire," the Duke replied firmly. "I have fortune and connections enough for both of us. What I lack is a partner of intelligence and character with whom to share my life. I believe I've found that in your daughter." When the gentlemen had concluded their discussion, and the Duke had received the requested permission, Winifred was summoned. Her father discreetly withdrew, leaving them alone, but with the door significantly ajar. "Well, Miss Barton," the Duke, Lucian said, his formal tone belied by the warmth in his eyes. "Your father has given his consent for me to address you. I find myself in the novel position of being uncertain how to proceed. For all my presumed arrogance in the ballroom last night, I realize I never actually asked the most important question." Winifred felt a smile tugging at her lips. "An oversight indeed, Your Grace." "Lucian," he corrected. "Always Lucian to you." He crossed to where she stood, taking both her hands in his. "Winifred Barton, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Not because society expects it or because it's advantageous, but because I believe we could build a life of genuine partnership and happiness together." She looked into his eyes, seeing not the Duke of Lockhart with all his wealth and status, but the man who had engaged with her mind, valued her opinions, and seen beyond the labels society had assigned her. "Yes," she said simply. "I would be honored to be your wife, Lucian." His kiss, gentle yet filled with promise, sealed their engagement. Weeks later, as Winifred prepared for her wedding, she received a visit from the Dowager Duchess of Lockhart, a formidable woman whose shrewd intelligence was immediately apparent. "My dear," the Dowager said, settling into a chair with regal grace, "I must confess to a certain satisfaction in this outcome. When I suggested to my grandson that he might find you suitable for organizing his father's papers, I had hopes that your intelligence would impress him. He has always valued substance over show." Winifred smiled. "I understand I have you to thank for our initial acquaintance, Your Grace." "Call me grandmother, please. We are to be family." The older woman's eyes twinkled. "I observed you for several seasons, you know, always standing apart, watching rather than participating in the follies around you. I recognized a kindred spirit, someone who sees beyond the superficial glitter of society to the complex humanity beneath. I never imagined anyone noticed. That's precisely why you were perfect for my grandson. You weren't performing for an audience, you were simply yourself." The Dowager adjusted her shawl. Lucian needed someone who would value him for himself, not his title or fortune. Someone with the intelligence to be his partner in managing our estates and the strength of character to withstand society's inevitable whispers. "And you believed I possessed those qualities." "I knew it the moment I heard you deflate Lady Harrington's pretensions with a single well-placed observation at Lady Dalrymple's musicale 3 years ago. Polite yet devastating, a rare combination." Winifred laughed, remembering the incident. "I had no idea I was being evaluated as potential Duchess material." "Not evaluated, my dear, appreciated." The Dowager's expression softened. "My grandson has made an excellent choice, and I couldn't be more delighted to welcome you to our family." The wedding of the Duke of Lockhart to Miss Winifred Barton became the social event of the season, not for its extravagance, but for its unexpectedness. Society matrons, who had pushed their daughters forward for the Duke's consideration, watched in disbelief as he pledged himself to a woman they had scarcely noticed for 6 years. Lady Harrington, seated near the back of the church, whispered audibly to her companion, "It won't last. She's too plain, too bookish, too old. He'll regret it within the year." Behind her, the Dowager Duchess of Lockhart leaned forward. "On the contrary, Lady Harrington, my grandson has chosen a woman of substance rather than show. Their marriage will endure long after the pretty faces of this season have faded. Intelligence, you see, never goes out of fashion." As Winifred walked down the aisle toward her future husband, she caught his eye and saw in his expression everything she had once believed impossible. Genuine admiration, deep respect, and unmistakable love. For a woman who had spent 6 seasons standing alone at the edge of ballrooms, the journey to the altar alongside the most sought-after man in England was nothing short of extraordinary. Yet what filled her heart was not triumph, but gratitude, for the twist of fate that had brought them together, for his courage in defying convention, and for her own belated willingness to believe that sometimes, against all odds and expectations, love finds precisely the right person at precisely the right moment. And as the Duke of Lockhart took her hand in his, Winifred Barton realized that sometimes the woman who has spent years watching from the periphery discovers that she was never truly invisible, merely waiting for the one person with the wisdom to see her clearly.